Okay, cool, cool. We'll start with this. So a bit of Colon again. It's a 21st century platform to teach you guys about practical aspects of doing business and educating yourself to be more prepared about the subjects which we cover. Uh, uh, about what we are going to do today. Yes, so coming back to what we're going to do today is a bit on foreign exchange. We're just going to cover topics at a very high level. Uh, I'm not been allowed to share the slides, and I highly recommend all of you to please take a notebook or keep a notepad ready so that you can take down the notes. I'm going to explain some technical concepts which with very simple sort of analogies. And I'm going to tell you basically how this whole thing is interlinked, how is FX linked to interest rates, and how we see business, and what are the key aspects which you need to know. So there we go. First slide on the topic is what we look at is the most important basic thing about exchange is it's an exchange. So you buy a currency and you sell a currency. So you need to exactly know how the quote FX quote work, which is the first thing and the most important thing. So now, can anyone tell me on the shared this thing chat, why have I highlighted this 4 or 5 currencies in bold in the G10 section? Any guesses? Why have I specifically put these currencies on the board and not all of them? They are higher values, no. Most traded, no. Divya says most traded, no. That's universally accepted, no. No. Anything else anyone has? Bigger markets, no. No. High volatility, no. Most traded currency, no. Widely available, no. Common denominator, yeah. We are getting there. We're getting there. So this, yeah, let's just look at the numerator and the denominator concept here. Uh, so you have to understand how FX is quoted in a market. So these are the 5 G10. So before that, G10 currencies are major currencies, which are primarily developed world currencies. EM currencies are emerging market currencies, which are not developed, which are like emerging in the sense that they're developing nations. So that's a very simple explanation of that. But these 5 currencies specifically, they are quoted on the numerator when they are quoted in the market. So on the right hand side, if you see, we have the quote. So if you look at it, euro dollar, euro is always on the numerator of all the quotes. If you look at GBP, that's pound sterling, that's always on the numerator. So these 5 currencies are always quoted as a major. So they are called majors basically because they are facing issues with the audio. Is anyone else also facing poor audio? Please fix. Let me see what I can do. Just give me a second. I'm trying to adjust the volume. Does that work? Okay, so I guess it's a bit of a bandwidth issue. Audio completely fine. So, okay, let's move on. I will try to go a bit slow. And okay, so if you don't get anything, just try to ask me questions. But the more questions you ask, the more slower we get. So it's a trade-off. So these 5 currencies, as we call them majors, so they are always quoted against the other currency. So if you take the example of dollar INR, it's always $1 equal to 75 or 76 INR right now. So you have to understand the quote and drill it down your head if you want to be in currencies. Because if you don't get this basic quoting, how the quote works, what are you buying, what are you selling, what is quoting against what, then you will always struggle with which currency am I buying, which am I selling, what is the rate. Because if you flip the standard quotes, then the rates will look very different, which is something which you don't want to do, because you track dollar INR as 75 or 76. You don't track dollar INR as 1/75 or 1/76. So same thing goes true for all currencies. And you need to know that as long as this, so when it comes to these 4 majors against dollars, they come on the numerator. So euro dollar, Aussie dollar, New Zealand Kiwi dollar against US dollar. But any other currency pair, dollar is the major, which is what you have to understand. All EM currencies are quoted against dollars. So that's the first and the most basic stuff of reading an FX quote. So 1 euro is equal to $1.1, $1 yen, $1 is equal to 107 or whatever yen. So these are the basic reading of quotes. This may vary from most of the theory books or CFA books or whatever, but because they take a very theoretical assumption at times. But when it comes to practical market in the developed world currencies, this is how it's quoted, and this is how you need to read the currency quotes. So that's the first important thing which you need to note down. Second is the concept of what these are theoretical concepts. What's a free float currency? Anyone in the group? What is free float? What is managed float? Let's see. Am I audible? Free float, managed float? Yeah. So Arjun is saying on which. Very good intervention. No. Free float is from demand and supply. No. Free float is what is available in the market. No, that's for equity shares, not for currency. Exchange rate is not artificially maintained. Yes, we are getting there. Allowed to depreciate, appreciate. Yes, sort of. So yeah, I mean, broadly it is that, but let me explain it. How do you see currencies? So it's linked to economics also. If a country's current account or whatever is a capital account is fully convertible, partially convertible, not convertible, it's linked to that. Plus it's linked to primarily the central bank policy. So a central bank which is very strong in a developed world, which has a lot of reserves, which can print currencies, are mostly the free float ones. G10, as you know, is mostly free float, but they also intervene in times of extreme distress. So dollar yen, we've seen a lot of time when there is intervention. So it's not that the central bank doesn't intervene. I mean, if you've heard about the George Soros incident when he made $1 billion in a day, though British pound was a free float or managed float at that time, the central bank did intervene. So any form of currencies, the central bank can intervene to manage their own currency, whatever be it. Managed float is purely a managed float, where the central bank says, okay, it will float, but it will float within a band. Some says no, we will manage it very actively, like RBI. India is technically a managed float in my view, because RBI intervenes whenever it wants to. And it also goes well with the fact that in the Indian market is not fully convertible. The economy is partially convertible on capital account and fully convertible on current account. So that's why they have to keep a tab on the currency. And our reserves are also very, very limited. So so that's what somebody's asking me. Will you share the PPT? No, I'm not allowed to share this PPT. That's why I'm saying you please take notes. This is not something which you will find in a lot of textbooks. And of course, we will have more sessions coming up with more detailed topics on each of these. So do not worry. This is an introductory class. If you're not getting any concept, just note it down. You can try finding it yourself on Google, or you can always reach out to us. We are there to help, but we are not going to share this PPT at this stage. Okay, so that is what. Okay, peg currencies, as the name suggests, you would know it's pegged to US dollar or a basket of it. But interesting question here, in this list of Bloomberg overview which I've pasted, which is the peg currency? Which one do you think is a peg currency in this list of 10 currencies under the overview, the Bloomberg screenshot which I have? No, dollar cannot be pegged. Dollar is just a single currency. When I say peg currency, it has to be a pair. CNY, yeah, it's pegged, but it still has a floating range, right? So CNY, I would not say it's strictly pegged. Yes, HKD, you're getting there. That's the one which is pegged right now. Euro CHF, no, CHF was pegged, but it got depegged in 2015. If you read that, Swissy has been depegged from euro and dollars. So, and that was a massive event in the foreign currency market. For those who are interested, should read about what happened. Why did Swissy? They pegged it once and then they depegged it. No, Zimbabwean dollar is a very, very wild example to take here. I'm not going to go there at all. Brazil is a floating currency. Dollar BRL is floating currency. It's only honky dollars, USD HKD, which is pegged in this pair. The other list of peg currency is about UAE. Yeah, all the Gulf Middle East currencies are pegged because they dollar Saudi, dollar Qatari, dollar Riyal, everything is pegged because the entire central bank policy is pegged to the US. They peg their interest rate, they peg their currencies. So these are the most classic examples of peg currencies. You don't have to bother much about them. They just move in a very, very fixed range, and the central bank is. So I'm being asked for the fact is whether the currency peg or not. So peg currency doesn't move that much. Like if dollar dirham is pegged at 3.6730 by central bank, it might move to 20, it might move to 30. The central bank is always there to manage that it does not go beyond the peg. But other currencies can move and the central bank can decide when they want to come. So it's the strength of the central bank which decides how well they can defend the peg in times of pressure. Right now, there's a lot of pressure on Middle East currencies because of oil going where it is, but central banks have enough reserves, so hopefully they will be able to defend the peg. We've seen time and enough that these are the central banks like the HKMA, Hong Kong Monetary Authority. They're very strong. They can defend the peg. We've seen there's been a lot of pressure when dollar CNY went haywire. So so there's a lot of dynamic around how they defend the peg and all that, and it can be a separate subject on its own. So let's just move it from there, that there are peg currencies, floating currencies, and free float currencies. We can discuss that later, what determines the peg of the currency or not. I am not able to hear anything. So what is everyone facing this problem? Then we switch off and switch it on again. I explained that EM and G10. EM is emerging market, G10 is developed market. That's the short form of it. So let me move to the next concept, please. What is cash, what is term, what is spot? So the quote which you see in the market is all spot. Spot is T+2. T+2 means the currency settles in 2 days from where you trade. It is similar to equity in more or less. So most of these quotes which you see on Bloomberg is on T+2 basis. So that is what it is. I think the audio quality may differ based on the internet bandwidth you are on. So I really can't do much about it. I'm trying to speak as loud as I can, but please bear with me. That's all I can say. I can later on, maybe we can do something about it. So T+2 is a standard settlement across globe for all currencies. No, there's one currency pair which doesn't settle on T+2. Anyone knows which one is that? It's there in the list of G10. That's the only currency in the world which does not settle on T+2. It settles on T+1. No, not yen, not Swiss franc. No. All these settles on 2 days time. There's only one currencies. Dollar is not dollar settles on T+2. Everything is quoted against dollar, so it has to settle on T+2. No, it's a tricky one. Unless you are in the market, you would not know that. It's CAND. It's CAD. Canadian dollar, no, Aussie also. It's only the Canadian currency which settles on T+1. So USD CAD it's called. So nothing. It doesn't change much. It's just for you to know. It's a fun fact. So we do a lot of. Currencies are quoted on spot, but somebody wants the currency today. It's a central bank policy. There's nothing like why, and just that they decide to settle on day+1. That's their call. That's what I think. So why can't? It's just one of the currency. It's a policy of the central bank. Rest all is settled on T+2. So it doesn't matter when they settle actually, because we adjust the price when we quote to when we do the business. So if somebody wants value today, we adjust the price, we discount it, and we quote him cash. If somebody wants for tomorrow, we settle it for value term. So there's a lot of trade which we do, which is today over term over spot over cash. All this swaps keeps happening because most of the currencies are settled on T+2, and you need to bring it forward, bring it backward, or you need to move it spot. Beyond spot also people trade, which is called spot next, 1 day beyond spot. So these are very, very basic high level concepts which at the desk, which once you join the desk or once you start trading, you will know about it, but nothing to be super important about it right now. What about future versus forward? So there's a lot of theory explanation around this, and I'm sure a lot of you know what is the future versus forwards. So my take on that is, just imagine going to a mom and pop store versus going to a supermarket. So what's the difference? A mom and pop store, you go to the store counter and you ask for a product. You ask for some modification, and you negotiate for the price. So you're literally talking to someone about what is the price. Can I do this? Can I do that? Versus going to a supermarket, which is technically a futures market, where the stuff is kept there. The prices are fixed. You just pick it up, you come out, you do your payment, and that's about it. So that's the difference between OTC and future markets. Future is standardized, quoted through an exchange, as somebody said. TOM is tomorrow. It's a short form of tomorrow. If you have to move a position from spot to T+2 to T+1, you bring it TOM. So that's why we call it tomorrow. It's a short form for tomorrow. So coming back to futures versus OTC forward. So all these currencies which you see, it's mostly OTC product, especially the EM and the derivatives and all that. And then there are futures market for these currencies which are not highly liquid. So most of the bank book on FX, on rates is OTC, not on rates, but FX primarily. It's OTC product, which means there's a trader who's technically taking the position, making the market, quoting you both way prices. So that's how it works. So an OTC market, though it's not accessible directly by a lot of individuals, but that's the market which has the maximum amount of liquidity. And that's where you get to trade larger volumes, longer tenors, and all of this. So, but this is an important concept to know, that you can basically trade for a particular date on OTC forwards versus OTC is over the counter. I mean, there are a lot of TLAs, 3-letter acronyms on it. Don't bother about it. As long as you know the meaning of it, it's fine. You're not going to remember the full form of it, this, and that's fine. So OTC is over the counter, which means so basically futures market, you don't need too many intervention. The things are quoted there. I mean, in a supermarket, you don't need a sales guy at every point, because stuff is kept there, the price is fixed. So forward is OTC, you're right. Forward is OTC versus future is supermarket analogy. So as long as you remember this analogy, any OTC versus future market, you should be able to figure it out. Next is broadly, I mean, this is more in reference to the OTC market. What are the main participants in OTC market? So one are hedgers. Hedgers are people like corporates who do exports, imports, who generally have a currency risk. So that is what is a hedger. A trader is a trader who's making a price. He's generally representing a bank or a financial institution who's running a risk, who's taking a position. And broker is the intermediary which connects all the traders, because not all the traders speak to each other. And the brokers have a wider access to the market than the trader of a particular bank at times. So brokers are the connection. They are the connecting people, basically. So these are three key participants, and there are layers in between. But more or less on an OTC market, you will find these three hedgers, or I mean, there can be other people also, like speculators and people who want to hold, or people who want to take positions. But broadly in an OTC market, you will find hedgers, you will find traders who run a book, and you will find brokers who basically connect. So swap points. So if I go back to the concept of cash, TOM, and spot, how do we adjust between that? It's a swap point. So there is a theory around interest rate differential, interest rate parity, purchasing power parity, PPP. So is there any arbitrage in Forex? No, I'm not going to take that question now, because that's not related to the slide. So please hold on to that. I will come to that later. So what is swap point, interest rate differential? So I mean, there's a lot of view that, some countries the interest rate is low, some countries the interest rate is high. So, you can just borrow from the cheaper country, invest in the country which bears higher interest rate, and you can make money. So that's called a carry trade. But the swap points, which is technically the forward points, which you need to understand, is when you deal beyond 2 days, is when you have to add or deduct the points. These are simply put the interest rate differential between the two currencies. If US is currently at 0% and India is at 6%, the swap point annualized to somewhere lead to that percentage on an overall basis. So on a theoretical framework, a fully hedged currency will cost you the same whether you borrow in dollars or whether you borrow in any other currency. But that rarely happens in the practical world, but that's what the theory says. And that's where the swap points arises. I mean, if you want to hedge your currency risk, you need to hedge through a forward or whatever instrument you want to, and you need to pay or receive the swap points, which basically takes care of the interest rate differential. The swap is nothing when you move a position from point A to point B, that's called a swap. Any position that you move from anything from status quo to a different place is called a swap in financial terminology, in a market parlance. You do a forward, that's a swap. You do an interest rate swap, that's a swap. So swap is very loosely used term in that way, but it is when you're moving a position to a future date, or you're doing something beyond the spot. So that's where you do a swap. So, and how the swap points are determined is by the interest rate differential. That's all I'm trying to say here. That, and you have to read through the theory of interest rate parity, purchasing power parity, the inflation differential to understand that on a theoretical point of view, so that if we do a separate session only on swap points, you are able to appreciate how that works. This is bid ask. So this, I'm coming back to the point, because you are, is there a dollar swap bonds? No, I didn't get that question. Is the dollar swap bonds by RBI fall in that category? No, I mean, I'm just talking about swap points as a theoretical concept here. I'm not going to the swap curves, which will be defined by what. We will do a separate session on what RBI does, how does it manage monetary policy, how does that impact FX. These are all separate topics. So let's do that as we reach there. So, but the practical answer is no. That swap points is just a theory concept which I'm trying to explain here. So bid ask, I come back to this because this is the most important thing in FX, because you're buying a currency and you're selling a currency. So you need to be very clear about what you're buying, what you're selling to the client or to your end customer. And you need to know what is bid, what is ask. So as long as you're clear on the numerator currency, that the currency which is quoted against which the denominator currency is quoted. So euro is quoted against the dollar and €1 equal to $1.1, whatever. You know that when you're doing a bid, when you're doing bid, that's left hand side and right hand side concept. So you're selling one currency, you're buying another. So bid is technically you're selling the denominator. Ask is bid is something which you're selling the numerator. Ask is something you're buying the numerator. So these things take a bit of time to understand what is bid ask. So these things take time to understand the concept of bid and ask, but it's a bit of practice, it's a bit of understanding, which will get you there once you are in the market, or once you want to really read the currencies bid ask. So that's simple concept, but it's very important. A numerator and a denominator in a fraction. Can somebody explain what is that? Ask is the right hand side when you buy the. So let's take a hypothetical example, dollar INR at 75, 76. So which means that you sell $1, you get 75, you buy $1, you get 76. So here 75 is the bid, 76 is the ask in simple terms. You need to write it on a paper to understand that. Again, that's why I told you, just take a notebook and write it. You write a rate dollar INR, put 75 under bid, put 76 under ask. So that means the bid for dollar INR is at 75 and the ask for dollar INR is 76. And again, if somebody is coming to me, if I'm the price maker, I make the price. If you want to sell me $1, I'm going to give you 75 INR. If you want to buy if you want to sell me INR and buy $1, I'm going to charge you 76. So you sell low, buy high. That's the whole concept here. Ask is again bid ask. It's buy sell. Ask is okay. I'll explain that more and more. Don't worry about bid and ask right now if you haven't got it. So next we move to FXO, which is, I mean, foreign exchange. These are the currencies, but you can do spot, you can do swap, you can do options. Now, option is again a very, very vast topic, but it determines a lot of things in the market. It is highly regulated in an Indian context. The government determines what product you can do and what you cannot do. But outside of India, it's totally free, in the sense that there are a lot of permutation and combinations which can be done around FX to do an FX option. And it is there for you to learn. I mean, there are a lot of theory textbooks around what are different call option, put option. We're not going to cover that here, but you know, anything more exotic, you get into the options world in the FX market. I'm going to cover a bit more of that on the few incoming slides. So structure of FX market, broadly what I wanted to convey is understanding of how to read currencies and some simple concepts of what is the value date, which is quoted, cash, term, spot, future, forwards, who are the broad market participants. So, you know, if you've got a bit of understanding of it, that serves the purpose for the time. before, can I move to the next slide? I think I should. 1 second. Yeah. So, okay. So don't worry. This slide does not have any more technical, lot of this technical stuff which we did on slide 1. So here, the image which you see is technically how a dealing room of a bank looks like. It's literally the same. Each person has 3 or 4 screens to look at, and you're literally busy with a lot of stuff, doing trading and sales. So do you understand that, what are the different components of FX or any other market business for that matter, because everything is interlinked. So you have, like any other factory, if you take a factory, there's a production site, which is the trading site where, where trading positions are taken for different products, whether it's a bond, which comes under a fixed income, whether it's a commodity, which can be a gold or a precious metal, base metal, whether it's a rate, which is the interest rate curve, whether it's a cash FX forward option kind of thing. So that's the trading book. Then you have sales, which is people who basically act as an intermediary between trading and the client. So a client would not understand what a traders say. So you need a sales in between to transact with the client. Okay, so that's how sales come in. So you have a trading business, you have a sales business. Then you have a lot of thing around compliance, operations, and IT, because this business is very heavy on ops and compliance and IT, because it's very easy to understand the theory, but putting into practice, there are a lot of countries with a lot of regulations which you need to be aware of. Whichever country you're doing, whether you're trading as an individual, whether you're trading on behalf of the bank, there are a lot of regulations which you need to be aware of. And not all of these regulations are very simple to understand, unfortunately. Whatever you think may be right from a moral point of view or from a conscious point of view may not be right in a market framework. So you need to ask a lot of people whether what you're doing is right or wrong. And that goes across the curve. Right from junior to senior people, they need a lot of help from compliance all the time, because if you get it wrong, you get it wrong, and the consequences can be fatal at times. So then you have the desk which sits in between, which is structuring. So if you need to mix 2-3 products together, and for a client, for example, a client wants to do an options on a gold, or he wants to do a bond which is backed by a gold or something, you need a structuring team in between, because they are the cross asset linkage, which technically mix the products. And these are not custom made, these are custom made products. So you need to understand the client's requirement. You need to work with a lot of teams, trading teams and structuring to know what a client wants. So that's again one more team which is doing the complex work for you. Then you have the balance sheet, which runs the bank's balance sheet, basically the asset liability management for the bank. They are literally the largest trader in the bank, because they manage a lot of cash. They manage the overnight position. They manage a lot of FX for the bank. They make sure that the depositor's money is safe and sound. So they are the key. But all three dress, the key one are sales, trading, and balance sheet. They're very closely interlinked, which means that if there is something which is happening in balance sheet, it's going to very soon trickle down. Some after effects are going to come to FX, and vice versa, because the markets are linked. Besides from that, you have an offshore team here which supports to do what you want to do globally. So that's there. And most of the banks, basically, they structure themselves geographically. So they have these kind of dealing rooms across the globe. So they have a hub which has 200, 300, 400 people doing this job, which is mentioned here pretty much across the teams. And then you have the smaller sites where you have 5, 10, 20, 30 people, depending on the number of the sites. So this is just to give you a sense that, you see so many people sitting together, but you might sit on the next row for 5 years and you might not understand what the other guy is doing, because the variety of the work is massive. A trader's work versus a sales work is totally different ball game. So, taking position versus simplifying that and going to a client is very, very different, is a very different proposition. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's always a learning curve in this kind of business, where even after 10 years or 15 years of work, you will still realize that there's a lot more for you to learn. So imagine if you all are starting now, or you all have done finance for a year or 2 years, and if you're not getting a few concepts here, there's nothing wrong with it. We all get it wrong. We all need to learn. So ask questions, ask questions if you're not getting a concept. I'll try my best to explain, but do read up as well. There's a lot of explanations available online. You can read it up as well for your own understanding. So somebody's asking, can I do treasury management and break into trading flow? Okay, no, I'm not taking any job related questions here. We will come at that at a later stage in a different course. What are the qualifications here to pursue this? I mean, different people from different qualifications go there. How to get there is again a different stream of course which we need to do, or we can have a chat later if you want to speak about that. But we're not getting into a career discussion at this stage or getting into the industry at this stage. We're just doing the basics of here. What you need to know is all of these products and all of these things are interlinked, which is why I'm talking about this right now. It cannot happen that the interest rate has gone up and you see some bit of activity on the interest rate desk and the FX market is silent. You will sense that something is coming to your floor too. So that's all I'm trying to say, that even if you do one product, you need to have a handle of all the products so that you can understand what's going on in the market and how is that going to come to your area of work or your space of work. So, I mean, whenever the stock market falls, the currency goes up or down, whichever way is a classic example for those of you who are tracking stock market. So it's similar to that. I mean, they're all interlinked. So any questions on this particular slide, or shall I move to the next slide? I guess I move to the next one. Okay. So here's a bit more on other asset classes. So FX we've covered. Now within FX, there's a huge amount of products which you can do, which are not allowed in India because RBI does not allow a lot of options. These are mostly exotic options, as we call it. I mean, once you start doing that, it won't look as exotic as the name sounds. But these all products have their own feature. You cannot learn these features because we customize it every time we go to a client. So you might say this product works like that, but we can always do a customize that product according to the client requirement. So there's no joy in sort of understanding or you know, I won't say understanding, but learning too much about the product, because product is something which once you start trading or once you start doing the sales job or whatever, once you start trading on your own, you'll get a hang of it very quickly. But what I'm trying to say is it's just not one straight product. There can be multiple variations of the same product. Next comes the rates business, which is again very interesting because, you know, a swap, again, interest rate swap, and don't ask me what is a swap again, because this is the same swap which we spoke about on slide 1. So the dollar IRS, the interest rate swap, there's a curve in the market, which is what is a standard dollar curve, which is where most of the dollar positions are there. Let's say, I mean, if you borrow $1 million as a loan as an Indian corporate in India, you still have the dollar risk, you still have the currency risk. So you will have to do that hedge through an interest rate or a vanilla swap market. So these are swaps which are quoted across in the market, and you have to structure the product based on the client requirement. Now, here again, there can be a lot of customization. I mean, any theory book you read, you will see how the product works, what is the payoff, all of this, but don't bother about it too much. As long as you know how a swap works, you can easily understand what is a cross currency swap, what is a basis swap, what is a structured swap. So these are all just products which you show to a client based on his requirement, and you can learn about those products at any point of time in your career. There's no like you have to learn it now to get into a place, or I mean, nobody hires basis you knowing what is a particular product. So that's about it on the product. Now, the next business is the credit and fixed income. This is where we cover a lot of bonds. A lot of clients want to buy bonds, sell bonds. Even we all invest in mutual funds which invest in bonds. So technically, mutual funds have to buy or sell bonds through a bank itself. So they are the customers here. Then you have a variety of dual currency deposits, a lot of products, credit default swap. In an environment like this, when credit spreads are going wider, the CDS markets have come very active because, so these all comes under credit and fixed income. This is a separate desk, a separate subject on its own. Takes a bit of time to understand because it's interest rates. And it's good for you to know that these are subjects which exist, but This not like you have to learn how it works, how it's priced right now. You can do all of that at a later stage when you want to trade, when you want to join a bank. But you need to understand how they're how it impacts from an economic point of view. So let's say in a time like this, when the default risk of corporates are going up, you should have a basic sense that CDS will spread trade wider, which means that the cost of default, which a bank will charge you now to hedge against the default risk, is going to be much more than it was under normal circumstances, because the risk is higher now. So higher risk, the bank is going to charge you a lot more to hedge the risk. What is a credit default swap? Which means that if you have a bond, let's say if you're holding a bond of $1 million, and if the company which issued the bond defaults, you technically lose that $1 million. But you can go and buy a CDS on that bond, where the bank says, okay, if the bondholder defaults, we will pay you. And it's like an insurance. Put it simply, it's like an insurance. So you've insured your position, and you paid an insurance premium, and insurance premium will go up in times of distress like these. So that's how you understand a product, not the technicals of the product at this stage, but the impact of market on those products. That's where you need to build your fundas. So like sovereign bonds, there are so many. I mean, thanks for all the feedback. It's just distracting me a bit. We can take it later for sure, but many thanks. What is dual currency deposit? Okay, so dual currency deposit is a deposit where we say, okay, you put money in dollars, you can redeem your for let's say 6 months, and based on certain conditionality, you can either get dollars back or you get pound back, which means that you are okay with both the currencies at the end of the deposit term, and there are certain conditionality attached to it. And because of those conditionality, you earn a little bit more product. So basic funda for this is, why do you do derivatives compared to FX? Can anyone tell me? I mean, just one question from my side. Why do you do a complex product compared to a vanilla FX product? Anyone? Derivative versus risk? I mean, no. Yeah. Hedging the risk. One more answer. That's very theoretical. Higher gain. Yeah. Exactly there. You're exactly there. It's high gain. You need to make more money to do derivatives. That's why you do derivatives. So in a single currency deposit, you know what is the interest rate. Let's say you put single currency deposit in dollars. Right now the interest rate is 0, but let's say hypothetically you earn 1% on that. But if I come to you, you do a dual currency deposit, you will earn 1.5%, but you might not get dollars back, you might get pound back if XYZ happens. So that's why a dual currency deposit comes into place. So it gives you a lot more gain, but it comes with a cost of risk. So that's what a dual currency deposit is. So basically the trade and fixed income team does all of this. These are products which can be structured, which can be monitored. Now coming back to commodities, so commodities is more exchange traded stuff. There is barring energy, which is a OTC product where you can do a lot more structuring. The metals and the softs are mostly traded through their respective exchange. Metals through LME and softs through CBOT. So they basically exchange traded product. Whatever price is there on the exchange, you just act as an intermediary. You show the price to the client, and he trades like the way you buy stocks in India. There's not much you do. So metals, the way we say is base metals is all your base metals, which are copper, aluminum, zinc. Precious metals is gold, silver, platinum. Your soft metal is all the commodities which are traded, like your cotton, like your grain. So these are market terms. I put it there because I want you to know that. So that's the 3 basic category of metal. Energy, you have mostly this, all types of crude, a bit of coal sometimes. So energy is where you do a lot of structured stuff. Mostly airliners and energy company, they do that. On metals, you mostly have a bit of activity, a lot more activity on base, because a lot of people have, let's say, exposure to copper. They buy copper for their business. They enter into contracts. So they have to hedge their position. The copper product is going to be manufactured in 6 months. They're going to book their sales in a year's time. But the price will keep moving every day, so they want to fix the price. Similarly, gold, a lot of these gold funds which are there in the market, they all don't buy golds and hoard it. They all, most of them, some of them in fact trade through the market. They cover through futures, and they keep rolling their position. So they are very active in that. So that's why you have these kind of markets as well. There are some banks which are specialized in doing that, some that are not. So is that the Indian Energy Exchange, but at an international level? I do not have much information on Indian Energy Exchange, to be precise, but I think it's a new one. But internationally, there is an energy exchange, that is right. But it's done more through OTC. Anything structured is done through an OTC where the traders take the risk. I mean, if you want to do a structured product or a vanilla option, sometimes it's quoted, sometimes the trader takes the risk on the book. So these things are not not something which you, unless you're a trader, you will not tell the other person whether you're going to take the risk or whether you're going to hedge it out in the market. This is the trader's call. So there are Chinese walls, or there are like well-defined segments which I mean, the first thing in our business, financial market business, is information is only given on a need-to-know basis, whosoever it is. So unless the other person does not need to know the information, you don't share it at all, because everything you do around this business is confidential. You're in a highly regulated environment. Sometimes you pick up the newspaper and you read a news and you know that's not true, because you know better than what the journalist would have written. But doesn't mean you go out there and question it, because you have access to a lot more private information than anybody else in the public domain. So these are the basics of doing any market business. So that's why you will not know a lot of stuff and there's a reason behind that. So that is what it is. Other asset classes. We move to the next. So there's a lot of people when I've launched this. So callers is just a product. Let's say that for now, it's just a combination of a buy option and a call option. Once we do products, we can cover all of that. Or if you just do an option caller on Google, it will tell you what it is if you're able to understand. But I'm not going to do a product definition at this stage, but it's just a product on the FXO space for the time being. Let's just put it there. So flow versus derivative. So these are the two key aspects of flow versus derivative. A flow is what I taught on the first slide, mostly foreign exchange kind of stuff, or anything which is vanilla, which is transactional, which varies with which. So the characteristic is it's very on the go, which means the client wants it, he comes and he does it. I mean, you're going abroad, you want to buy currency, you buy and go. Like that's the flow business, the classic case of a flow business. You want to buy an Apple phone, you want to pay somebody in dollars for an Apple phone which you bought from somewhere, you just buy dollars and pay him. So that's a flow kind of activity, right? There's nothing structured there. It's on the go. And this flow business is probably 70-80% of the business, because that's where the bulk of the volumes is, bulk of the people are, and bulk of the P&L, the profit. So, but this business is getting a lot more electronic traction now, because we all understand that it's much easier for somebody to just do it on its own on a screen, rather than calling someone, asking for a price, haggling for it, and then somebody booking it. So I'm coming to ISDA. Don't worry, I'm coming to ISDA. So that's what flow business is. But the characteristic of flow business is still, it's very intense in the sense that, I mean, if you're a Forex dealer, or if you're a dealer of a bond, you might have to deal with 1,000 phone calls a day on a bad day, or on a good day, maybe 100 calls, which means that you're technically with a client. Vanilla business, anything vanilla business is plain. So when you're plain, there's nothing complex about it, which means that when you're going abroad, when you're going abroad, you want to buy a currency, you bought a currency. That's a very vanilla transaction in market terminology. So that's called vanilla business. Yeah, you got the definition right. No strings. No. It's nothing like that. No strings attached. What I'm trying to say here is that this flow business is where there's a lot of electronicization, if I can use the term, that's happening. A lot of blockchain kind of stuff happening in this business. It is very intense in the sense there's a lot of innovation which has happened here because of the technology, and this space is moving very fast, very, very fast. And this is where, you need to have an understanding of the flow business out and out to understand derivatives. Now, let me tell you what is derivatives. I mean, we all know the theory. We all know the theory is in of what is derivative and all of that. But from an OTC product point of view, derivative is like a good 5 to 10 years kind of marriage with a client, which means that you will do a trade which is longer. So then we come to ISDA first. When you are entering into a relationship with someone for a long term, you need to set the terms of the relationship. It's like your tenancy contract. Unless you're setting out the terms of the relationship, you can't, of course, transact. So ISDA is, I mean, we know the definition of ISDA is there on the chat. It's a document, it's a master document which determines what will be the term of the relationship. How are we going to behave in all the circumstances, good, bad. And this itself can take you a year or year and a half if you're dealing with a big billion-dollar company to do that documentation. So welcome to the world of derivatives. If you're thinking that it's complex and it's nice and it's very very fancy, very sophisticated, it is, but you have to be as good as a lawyer, you have to be as good as inflow products to understand all of that. Yeah, I mean, bond indentures and all are very specific documents, but ISDA is the master document which covers that. So, and then why I put the next word CSA, Credit Support Annex, is because, I mean, it's like when you're entering into a tenancy agreement, how do you pay rent to the client, to your landlord? That's what CSA determines, whether you pay it every day, whether you pay it every month, whether you pay it at the end of the contract. It's like that. So, and this arrangement of how you're going to pay, what are the terms, determines a lot of things around pricing, a lot of things about product, what you can show him, what you cannot. It basically sets the tone of the whole relationship. Okay, now with a simple smaller companies, they don't have policies to negotiate this document. They accept the standard clauses, so then it's much simpler. But you don't deal many complicated products with those companies anyways. The more complicated products you deal with companies which have bigger billion-dollar balance sheets, and they go through this document very, very nicely. So for now, you don't have to sweat over knowing what it is. You just have to understand how it works. If come a situation that you are thrown into a situation where you have to negotiate this document with anyone, then you will have enough legal support available to understand the clauses and negotiate it. But this is where the derivative business starts with in an OTC environment, over-the-counter environment. Next is you have to understand, as we've discussed, that derivative people do because they want to make more money, more gain. But if it's a 5-year trade, when do you want to do that gain? You want to do it right away, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. So that determines the carry of the trade. So if you're locking your gains early on, right now you're getting a gain and you don't see, I mean, anyways in the market environment, nobody knows what's going to happen 30 days down the line or 1 year down the line or 2 years down the line. Nobody has a line of sight, right? It depends on a lot of factors. So, but when you start the trade, are you in the money? Are you out of the money? Which means that immediately are you going to make money or you're going to lose money? That is what a carry is in a very simple language. So you enter into a trade, and for the next 6 months, you're going to make money. On books, it looks like you're going to make money. That's when it's a positive carry trade. The carry is in your favor. Versus if you're doing a trade where you're not going to make money in the first 3-4 months, if you were to unwind or cancel the trade, which is where it's a negative carry trade. So to put it simply, it's just that when is the money coming to me? Is it coming to me immediately or is it coming to me later? Later thing is anyways not sure about, because we don't know what's going to happen. If it's coming to me immediately, whether it'll actually come to me or not, because it will come to you only if you do certain unwind and all that. So by unwind, I mean you cancel the trade or all that. So we always speak in terms of carry of a trade because that determines how we are going to price it. So, and the positive carry trade, needless to say, are more attractive because you see money right on the table, right in front. And a lot of companies use derivatives besides making gain, besides doing hedging, is to shore up their balance sheet and P&L. That's the reality, which you need to understand. I mean, through derivatives, you can hide your losses, through which you can show more profits on the near. If you're going for an IPO and you want to show more profits, you can still, there are ways and means around it to do it so that your balance sheet and P&L looks nice and clean because of that derivative trade. So that's something which you need to be aware of. There's one more reason behind it. Of course, there's a lot of clamping around it. We don't allow it. We don't want that to happen, but it still happens. Sort of, I would say out of the money, sort of, but what happens after that, nobody knows. So just a positive carry, negative carry for the time being is good. Now, the third most important concept about derivative is the XVAs. One of that is the credit valuation adjustment. So this is something which not all the banks or financial institutions in India follow it, but they're getting there. It's under the Basel III norms and Basel IV norms and all that, which means that if I am entering into a 5-year trade with a client, what if the client defaults after 2 years? What happens? Okay, the client can default and I can lose my money as a bank or as a financial institution, but I need to factor that risk at the time of booking the trade. So I need to add my spread, which means that I need to cover a lot more. I need to basically charge a little bit so that if there is a default at a portfolio level, I have a bit of reserve, credit valuation reserve, through which I can cover my losses, right? So that's CVA. And there are a lot of variations of this. It is a very, very mathematical concept. So we don't expect you to sort of sit and calculate CVA, but you need to understand the impact of these CVAs on derivative pricing to be able to trade in derivatives, to be able to buy derivatives, to be able to sell derivatives. And this is a very, very, it's a bit technical concept, but it's not too difficult to understand, but it is the core and the central part of derivative OTC products. Next is accounting for derivatives. So I spoke about it, right? You need to know why the client is doing derivatives. Also, you need to know what will be the impact of that trade on the client's balance sheet. If things were to go bad, if things were to go good, which means that you need to know the client's accounting policies. How does he account for derivatives? And then you need to suggest or show him a product according to that. I mean, a derivative product can have an MTM, mark to market, which is notional losses or gain, on a quarterly basis or an annual basis. So how does he treat that MTM? Does it wipe out his profits? We do stress testing at 5%, 10%, 15% negative and positive MTM to see at what level will the client's balance sheet or P&L get heavily impacted, that his business will be shut, right? It can go to that extent in a scenario like this. So you need to understand accounting for derivatives, a bit of theory around it, how this is shown in the books of it, if you were to become a mature and a seasoned derivative sales or a trader. Because unless you know that, you will never understand why is the client trying to do what he's trying to do. And if things blows out, you will again not get it. Why, how did that happen, right? So that is sort of, I think, and we're on time, is sort of end of no, we have one more slide. Okay. So next slide is about trading in FX. This is very simple for most of you who trade. Anyone trades on NSE here, on the futures or whatever? Any individual traders on the screen, on the chat? Equity, no, FX I'm talking about. I know equity, everybody trades equity in India. Anybody trades FX, dollar INR positions in NSE? No worries. So what happens there is, in India, you have a very, very thin market of, I would say thin, some would say thick, but it's very thin compared to the OTC market, where you can trade in lot sizes of $10,000, which means one lot is equal to 7.5 lakh rupees. It's like your equity futures, similar funda, it settles on its own. You can trade, you can reverse your position, so it's vanilla. I have also seen that there is a bit of FX options which get traded in NSE. On the retail segment, from a trading perspective, I think this is the in lot size of $10,000 and equity futures, but you compare it with an OTC market, which is highly regulated, which means that if you are running a company, or if you work for a company which does export, import, or which borrows in foreign currency, then you of course have to access the OTC market through a bank to to buy or sell dollars, to cover your export proceeds, or to make your import payments, or you need to hedge your dollar positions because you borrowed in dollars and your business is in INR. So that's where you sort of go and work with the bank. You try to hedge your position. But at whatever stage you are, I mean, whether you're working for a company, or whether you're getting into a B school, or whether you're a graduate, what you need to look at is how are things moving with the news flow, which is what I mean. Any news comes, how it impacts the market, what is positive for the market, what is negative for the market. As long as you start developing that basic sense of it, I think getting hang of the product and the regulations and all will come in its own due time. Uh, yeah, I mean, so when you trade in FX, or when you are selling FX, or when you're an FX trader, it's just not FX which you need to know. You need to know economics, you need to know politics, you need to know international relationships. You need to know a lot of things, because everything impacts the market right now. I mean, we say politics drive the market, and it does at this stage. So developing an understanding early on helps. What is international relationship? How does it impact the FX market? What are the policies? How does trade policies impact FX market? So all of that you need to start developing a knack of at an early stage. And again, I mean, OTC market is a market where roughly, I think, $7 to $8 billion get traded every day in India. And the larger players there are FIIs who invest in equity markets. So of course, they need to buy rupees, so they sell dollars, which is why when market goes up, stock market goes up, dollar rupee appreciates, and vice versa. When they sell in the market, when they sell their positions in the market, they need to buy back the dollars to basically take it from where it came from. So dollar rupee then weakens. So that's very, very elementary and a basic level of FX and the subjects associated with it. We are almost coming to the end of the slide, and yeah, good to go with any question, guys. I mean, I'm there if you want to ask any questions. If you want to send me questions later, you can use the Colon email ID to send it as well. But yeah, I mean, we can go to any slide, any questions now you want me to address. So that is where I am now. So there we go. Any questions there, or shall we? Okay, let me see the questions one by one. Okay, thank you for the informative sessions. Okay, no worries. No worries. Any questions for me, guys? Any questions? Cases where Sensex has gone down yet the dollar has depreciated. Can you explain that? So yeah, I mean, you need to understand that in a market like India, the RBI is also an active player. So Sensex go down, but RBI, what if RBI is buying dollars? Okay, so whosoever wants to buy dollars, RBI is intervention. So that's where it's managed float. It's, I mean, there are no hard and fast rule that even A happens, even B has to happen, because there's a third party like RBI or somebody who's always sitting out there to intervene in the market. Can you explain credit default swap? So it's like buying an insurance. Credit default swap is like buying an insurance. If the default happens, the insurer pays you for the default. If there is no default, then you paid your insurance and you've lost the money. That's credit default swap in plain and simple English. Just for a minute. Oh, you want to take screenshots? Okay, no worries. That should be okay. So, okay, quickly. Yeah, but we can do more sessions on subjects from these slides, because these are heavy on topics, and we are brushing through a lot of topics, so we can pick and choose topics which can be of interest to a bunch of you, and we can do more focused discussions where, you know, I have a bit of time to explain, you have a bit of time to ask more questions.